I'm going to provide some background information, a little bit about myself, then I'm going to put up some key questions that I think people are asking about. What is the supergrid? How does it work? What are the opportunities? Where do we stand on this? And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have a full 30 minutes of questions and answers. And then we're going to go into a reception and enjoy each other's company in there. I'm going to click through these very quickly. This is just to let you know that I've been involved with the energy and environment topic for a long time. I worked at the Public Utilities Commission for 15 years as the executive assistant to 15 different commissioners. I worked at the Renewable Energy Lab for 5 years. Worked in the energy office both for Governor Bill Ritter and for John Hickenlooper. In that time, I prepared a lot of white papers, blueprints that had to do with the renewable opportunities here in Colorado. We had a lot of help from the Renewable Energy Laboratory. There's a gentleman in the audience named Dave Hurlbert who was a consultant on this and helped us tremendously with the analysis, the research. The whole purpose at these jobs was to see what the renewable energy resources are in Colorado and in the West, and then what transmission is required to bring those green electrons into the load center. Fortunately, I had the institutional support in the Energy Office and at the Renewable Energy Lab and at the Public Utilities Commission to be able to retain consultants and contractors to be able to really put the package together. I'm not going to spend any time on this because everybody here knows that we are in a climate crisis. And this climate crisis is in fact the predicate for why we are working so hard to try to get a supergrid going. You're all familiar with these curves that are worse than disturbing. So we are in a real climate emergency. And if the carbon dioxide levels just keep on climbing, which they will, unless we do a lot of things that are very, very bold, we are going to be in a very different place on this planet. And so what I'm here to say that we've got some questions about the supergrid. What is it? I'm going to have to turn this way to see, because I can't quite read all the way back there. Is it really such a bold idea? Who has studied it? How does it work? Does it boil down to supply and demand? Does it require any new technology? Who's going to benefit and why? How much would it cost? How much new renewable energy is it going to deploy? And how much carbon would be avoided? And what is it going to take to build it out? And who may be against it and why? And who's for it and why? And what is the holdup? And what regulations must change? Well, of course, I've got 50 minutes to answer all these questions. No, you're going to get little hints as to what the problems are. You're not going to get any solutions to it all because this is a national, historic, almost an epical quest towards change. So I put up this funny little slide up here of Scientific American. I'm not going to be talking about that so much, but yes, it's a bold idea, but it's not a new one. In fact, this topic has been studied all the way back to 1923 with the Chicago Tribune, 1952, Bureau of Reclamation, 79, Bonneville Power Administration, 94, Western Area Power Administration. Ron Horstman is here from the Western Area Power Administration, and he's been continuing along the level of helping at Western to work with his colleagues across the country on this. The Department of Energy has a national transmission study, and I believe that Dave Hurlbert, where I can't see you, are you working on that study? Are you working on that study, Ron? Okay, so That's the big one. That's the big one in the sky, is that National Transmission Study. And I'll be talking in some detail about the study that was done at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I'd like to recognize a couple of individuals that worked on that right now. Sandy McDonald, you want to raise your hand? Your colleague, I just forgot your name again. Adam. These two gentlemen were co-authors along with a couple other authors to do this massive research, which I'll be describing in a very abbreviated way. And then there was the Seams Interconnections study that was done at NREL a few years ago. I'll be talking a little bit about that. And then they did a subsequent study just this past August. The point here, though, is that these are not the only studies. There are studies that are going on all over the place, and I'll mention a few more later on in my presentation. Now, I think most of you recognize that we've got three interconnections in the country, but they are not interconnected. And this is a historical legacy. It's nothing that was like planned to be this way. It's the classic, it is what it is. And it poses opportunities and problems in this country. There's the Western Interconnection, Eastern Interconnection, and ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. They're all operating on 60 hertz, but they're not quite synchronized. And so therefore you cannot transfer electric power across these grids very easily. So who has studied in recent years? I've mentioned NOAA, NREL. Princeton University did a really nice study just recently. The Climate Institute, which Sandy helped them with it, has done, and many others. Now, I was introduced to Sandy about maybe 6 months ago, and I was really not, I have not been working and thinking too much about the supergrid over all these years, even though I've been involved in transmission, because it was such a macro issue that I just felt it was never really part of my job description, either in the Energy Office or at the Public Utilities Commission, or certainly not at the Renewable Energy Laboratory. But I met Sandy and I read his papers and I started to go deeper and deeper into the supergrid, finding out what's going on. So as you know, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is up there in Boulder. Sandy was for many years the director of the Environmental Laboratory, Earth Systems Research Lab, and was the director of that. And there's several hundred people that worked with him. He was able to take some of his top people, and they know all about climate change, and they realize what is the most auspicious, effective thing that we could possibly do to be able to address this big topical area at scale as much as possible. And what they found after doing all of the analysis, working with supercomputers and super smart people, they came up with the supergrid concept. Again, they didn't do this on their own. Their people have been doing this for many years, but NOAA really did a great job, and I'll talk a little bit about this. You can imagine that this is the world in which NOAA lives. They're into weather forecasting, and these guys are meteorologists. They're weather experts, and you've heard the old saying that, well, the sun goes down and the wind stops blowing, but the sun is shining somewhere, and the wind is blowing somewhere. Well, they're looking at this thing from a continental, even a global level, and they know that over these four time zones in the country, you could have a lot of sun and a lot of wind and a need for it in a different part of the country. But the point is, you can't get from here to there with the existing transmission system. You need a supergrid. They looked at all of the information, much of it coming from the Renewable Energy Laboratory, that has characterized the wind and the solar, and they married that up with all this weather data and a whole lot of other data. They also married it up with pricing data. And here's just an illustration that, like in the evening on the East Coast, when it's needing those electrons, there is not the local renewable energy to be able to fulfill that demand. But if you could supply that demand with renewable energy from, let's say, the Southwest with solar, or from the Midwest with wind, this is the way you could really pull together a continental-wide electricity market. So this is the way it is described by NOAA. It's a computer optimization for the lowest cost electricity with 100% reliability. The computer used high-resolution weather and electricity consumption data to design an optimal U.S. network. No carbon taxes or subsidies were included, and it found that the very best system was based on a national real-time electricity market. They wanted to turn this into a national market, electricity, instead of it just being a regional or a utility scale enterprise. Make electric power and make renewable energy a national market. The only electricity technology which was ready to scale, now this was done back in 2016 or so, and things have even dramatically changed, even in the past 5 to 6 years, where the economics have become even better. But what they found was that you use the supergrid, wind, solar, gas, and storage. They initially were using some degree of natural gas, and I'm sure that there are those that want to continue some degree of natural gas, maybe not nearly as much as we're using now, and then decarbonize the hydrogen by 2045. Now, on the storage story is a whole lot better now than it was in 2016, and every day we're finding that people are going after that prize. So the way they further describe this is that in the 21st century, the installation of underground national high voltage direct current transmission grids spanning the contiguous U.S. would connect electrical energy sources with electrical energy demand centers and create a national marketplace for electrical energy, accelerating the pace of cost-effective decarbonization of the nation's electricity supply. So here is one view where you actually use the railroad right-of-ways. We'll be getting into this a little bit more, but you can put the high voltage direct current right along the right-of-ways of the railroads, and that way you would ameliorate the need for the transmission towers, because a lot of people don't want the transmission towers, and there's also other benefits by putting it underground. We can get into that. I do want to repeat again that the Supergrid Concepts were developed by Alexander, also known as Sandy McDonald, and his colleagues. This was great because I'm sure that many of you have heard of this publication. It's like one of the preeminent science journals where people submit their papers, peer-reviewed papers and so forth. And this received one of the top honors. They rate these publications, these papers, as to their public relevance, and this received one of the highest ratings that has ever been given. So it's been widely recognized in the academic and the scientific community for its value. What they conclude is that carbon dioxide emissions from the U.S. electricity sector can be reduced by up to 80% relative to 1990 levels without an increase in the levelized cost of electricity. So we're gaining both consumer benefit by stabilizing our electricity rates, because we're not going to be subject to the volatility which we're all experiencing, seeing what's happening with natural gas prices. And so as we increase the amount of renewable energy on the system, we could back off on the natural gas. And so there's that benefit, but there's also tremendous carbon benefit because we will not be pumping this up. Now, the United States is not alone on this, by the way, and I'll be showing you what's going on in Europe and in China, where they're also picking up on this. So this is not just a plan for the United States. This reduction is achieved by implementing a national system enabled by a HVDC network. Now, I emphasize the word network rather than it just being an isolated thing, state by state, utility by utility, region by region. This is, by definition, a national imperative. So this is a map. It's a little bit out of context, but this map shows you what the high voltage lines are that are above 345 kV. That's pretty high power, and almost like 99% of the transmission out there, of course, is alternating current. This is not the DC supergrid, the high voltage DC supergrid is not intended in any way to displace or replace the alternating current system. It's an overlay to enhance the opportunities to be able to pull the power which is already on the grid and to be able to deliver over a wider area. Now, notice this is just to the east of us. You know, you basically have no large 345 kV that is out there on this big swath, because that's the area where they call the seams, like the seams on your shirt. That's the seams, and this is not by design. It's this way. It's just the population would not suggest that there would be a need for a lot of high voltage alternating current out there. But even that is changing, and I have some slides to show you on that. This is the National Renewable Energy Laboratories Interconnections seams study that was conducted back in 2018. I'll be talking about that a little bit. NREL was the lead researcher on this, and they led these different national labs, universities, industries, and in quantifying the benefits and costs of options for continental transmission across the U.S. electric grid. Now, this is distinct from the NOAA. It's close to, but it is distinct from the NOAA study. They're looking at the seams. That's that dotted black line that shows you the western interconnection, the eastern connection, and the Texas grid. What they wanted to do is they wanted to look at what the opportunities are to be able to build out infrastructure that could cross across that seam so that you get the western interconnection and the eastern interconnection. I don't think, and Dave, you could tell us, it didn't really get into Texas, did it? The study didn't go to Texas so much? Okay, so it was mainly between the western interconnection and the eastern interconnection. And there are a number of ways to do that. So this is like a close cousin to the NOAA study. But the distinct is that the NOAA study was continental, and this is that seam study. Well, unfortunately, there was a situation that happened. This happened during the Trump administration. And unfortunately, you know, it's just one of those things that was happening during the Trump administration, which is, I'll tell you about that in the next slide. But look at the partnerships that they had on this. Tremendous partnerships. There was a research team of all of these laboratories and institutions, including regional transmission organizations and so forth. And then they had a technical review committee that gave feedback on it. And this was a full-blown exercise at the Renewable Energy Laboratory, which was really going to the big picture of what we're talking about this evening. Now, unfortunately, and I don't want to get political, but this is kind of political. I mean, the reality is that there were people that from the Department of Energy who were the political appointees that were having to look at this study, and they were taking notes, and they're thinking, our boss isn't going to like this because our boss wants coal to be continuing jobs and economy for coal. So unfortunately, there's a story here. It's kind of a sordid tale, and I won't get into the details, but unfortunately, it got slowed down and actually stopped. So it's been released. You could go now onto the website and read through the SEAM study, and it's fantastic. But it got slowed down, and it's a classic example of political interference where they just should have left it alone, and we would have had the results a little bit faster. But that's not what happened. And just click through these things. But basically, the SEAM study said the study showed that the U.S. grid modernization would eliminate up to 35 megatons of CO2 emissions and save consumers $3.6 billion every year. I mean, this is a fantastic story, and it's for the people who care about the climate crisis and people who care about their electric bills. This is quite an amazing story. the story was not really getting out the way that it could have and should have. But my point here is that, even though the thing was stalled, we're okay now. It's 2023. There's a new boss in town. The Department of Energy is a different operation than it was under the Trump administration, and NREL followed up with a new iteration, which expands upon what the STEAM study was, and it's called Examining Supply Side Options to Achieve 100% Clean Electricity by 2035. Now, remember, electricity is just part of the economy-wide energy system. But we're now in the process of wanting to electrify everything: electric vehicles, electrify the buildings, electrify our homes, electrify industry as much as possible. And so what this new study has at NREL, they evaluated a variety of options, different scenarios that could put the U.S. on a path to economy-wide net zero emissions by 2050. So it takes it to 2035 on the electric side and 25 economy-wide, which means like trying to replace those liquid fuels like oil or the gaseous fuels, natural gas, methane. And it looks at the technical requirements as to how you could achieve that, what the challenges and the cost implications are. So that was released, and I encourage you to go onto the NREL website and just tap this in. By the way, I'll let you know that this PowerPoint is available. All you have to do is email me, and I'll shoot it back to you, so that you don't have to be necessarily writing things down. But I encourage you to go to the Renewable Energy Laboratory, and you can access these studies. Now, many of you in this room, I think, already know this, but I will put this up just for those that may not know this. It's fairly straightforward. Nearly 100% of the transmission that's out there is alternating current, and that's perfectly fine, and that's the way it should be, and that's the way it is. So again, this is not to displace alternating current. It's to take that alternating current and to convert it into direct current, and then to drive that direct current either across an intertie to connect the western and the eastern and the Texas, or to have these long lines. Now, to have the long lines, they could be point to point, or better yet, as the NOAA system says, they should be a network, just like our phone systems or other networks. This should be like a national network, because point to point achieves a certain amount of efficiency, but if we could expand this story and get it lifted up to a national level, that's what it needs to be. So you convert it from AC to DC, cross the seams or cross the country with direct current, and then put it right back into alternating current and distribute it. So I thought, to really simplify it, it's just essentially, it's the way the inverter works on your solar system. A PV system is of course direct current. It's got to go through an inverter to get it into alternating current so it works in your house. This is what it is. But on the macro scale, the supergrid scale, you have to have these converters. And these little red dots, I'll show you in a minute. This is what that web would look like. Just a conceptual. This is like a conceptual. These are not really actual, detailed places where it needs to be. It's been optimized according to population and according to where the renewable energy is. But these little red dots, I'm going to show you what they mean in a minute. Those little red dots are those are just examples of how often you would have these conversion infrastructure to be able to take that DC and to put it into AC. So it'd be every, say, 200 or 300 miles apart, mainly in population centers. So this is just one part of the country. So this previous one didn't want to have all those red dots everywhere, but there would be red dots all over this country. Okay, so what would that look like? Oh, look at that. That is a big transistor converter that is converting AC into DC. And we've got one of those here in Colorado. There's another one. And they've got these in a lot of parts of the country. They are expensive and they are efficient. There's one that I came across that is conceptual, an artist's rendering, because we're now looking at massive amount of offshore wind, like on the East Coast in New York and so forth. And that's where you would have one of those big converters out there that would be next to the wind. Now, one of the things about one of the advantages of direct current is it takes up a smaller footprint. First of all, the towers, when you put it on a tower, the towers are shorter than the AC towers typically for the amount of power that's going across. It also has a smaller footprint. So the right of way, you don't have to buy as much land. So there's certain advantages. And of course, the DC can travel either across towers or it could just go underground. It's not like it needs to be in one place or the other. It all depends upon the terrain and what the best opportunity is. Now, this is a very simplified version as to what the advantages and disadvantages of AC and DC are. AC has the advantage of not having those huge conversion costs, but after a certain distance, maybe 300-400 miles, DC starts to win the economic battle. It's also less line loss. It's about half the line loss of alternating current. Direct current has about half the line loss. Now, this is very simplified, and what I just said is subject to particulars where things might not be so cut and dry, but essentially, the economics of direct current really start to come into play after about 300 or 400 miles. Does not require new technology. This stuff has been known for a very, very long time. It can connect the regions that are not synchronized. It has less resistance, so that means there's less line loss. I mean, I'm just going to put out some really rough figures, but like, let's say an alternating current line, high voltage line, might have over, say, 300 miles, something like a 5 or 6% line loss. Well, I mean, in very rough terms, maybe half of that line loss would be experienced on direct current. But of course, that statement needs to be modified according to certain conditions. Fewer cables, so smaller right of way, and has very little line loss, considerably less than alternating current. This slide might be a little bit hard to see, but it's a map of the United States. This shows you existing direct current lines. There's the one that is coming down from Oregon right down to Los Angeles. That's serving about 4 million households are being served by that particular that particular direct current line. There's big hydro up there in Canada that's moving that power right down on the DC line into New York City. And so forth. And now those little dots, that's the seams. They have that, but those little machines are only taking alternating current from the western interconnection to the eastern interconnection, but they're only at pretty small voltages. They're only about like maybe 200 kilovolts. 200 megawatts can travel. So now here's one in Europe. The red are the existing links, and I found it interesting, the channel, that goes from France to England, or if you're English, it goes from England to France. There's a DC line that's running right through there. And then there's some that are under construction, and some of this is helping to save Western Europe under the energy crisis that they are now experiencing. And then there's some proposed ones. There's a whole bunch of ones that are proposed, some coming out of Australia into Singapore. There's things that are being proposed that are coming from the Sahara up into Europe. And China got onto this quite a few years ago. Starting in 2009, that they started to build their high voltage. Of course, we've had them before that, but there's, as you can see, theirs is not networked yet, but these are segments that could eventually be networked. But they are bringing in huge blocks of renewable energy into the load centers, so there's a lot of that. Now, looking at the time, I'm still good. I'm more than halfway through. So who's going to benefit? Well, let's take this down to the economics. Probably many of you have heard about the levelized cost of electricity, and there's a company called Lazard that has been doing this for years, and it changes every year. This is 2021 information from Lazard. This is kind of the go-to team that people use to be able to learn what the levelized cost of electricity is today. And so this is hard to read, but I will show you this, is that the wholesale cost of electricity, the wholesale cost of electricity from wind is about 3.3 cents. That's about what it is today. Things have changed because of supply chain issues and so forth. And solar about 3.4 cents. They may have gone up a tenth of a percent or something in the past year or so, but this is it. Now, gas is around 6 cents. But the problem with gas, as you all know, is its volatility. We're shipping a lot of gas through over to Europe because they've been cut off, and they've cut themselves off from Russia. So there's liquefied natural gas that's going out of Texas, and that's causing some volatility in the system. Or you could have like an LNG terminal in Texas that has been offline for six months because of a fire. So the gas prices are higher, and they could go down. Yep, they could go up. As a betting man, I think they're going to be going up. Despite the miracle of hydraulic fracturing, we are right now as consumers, we're seeing what's happening to our gas bills. Even our electric bills have gone up because there's a fleet of natural gas advanced combined cycle plants. If we didn't have those advanced combined cycle plants and they were replaced with renewable energy, then we would have stabilized, lower, ultimately much lower electric bills. Wind is 8.3 cents, and they expect that to be dropping after experience. And coal is now at almost 11 cents, and nuclear is at 16.8 cents. This is Lazard. Nobody's coming in wanting to build more nuclear reactors, even though people talk about the nuclear renaissance. It's not going to happen. No PUC, even in the South, is going to say yes to another nuclear reactor. And same thing with coal. So what we're down to is wind, solar, storage, and transmission, and distributed energy resources. Okay, so how much does Supergrid cost? Well, we don't know because it's not happening, but the studies have been done, and just to put a number on it, maybe about 2 cents a kilowatt hour would be added. So if we have wind and solar at 3 and 4 cents, and you add another 2 cents to the wholesale price, you still are less than the price of gas, coal, or nuclear. So this is what the cost structure is of transmission. There's different costs. It's the station equipment, which is the main thing. Okay. Now, here's the problem. We've got so much renewable energy opportunity in this country and around the world. And these developers, they saw the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is giving them a clear business case pathway for the next 10 years to be able to get all kinds of investment tax credits, production tax credits. So, and it's sending a signal to the financial institutions and to the renewable energy developers, utility scale, get some projects going. Well, you could get those projects going, but if they don't have a highway to run down, they're not going to happen. So these are stranded opportunities until we get the transmission built. So we're talking about tens of thousands of projects, and if we made this continental, then you wouldn't be just trying to fill the marketplace for Public Service Company of Colorado or Colorado Springs Utilities. These renewable energy companies could be finding themselves on a national market. I just happened to Google. It occurred to me, who are the people that build these things? Well, here's just a list of companies. Some of these companies might be recognizable to some of you, but they built 30,000 miles of transmission, and the Supergrid is about 60,000 miles. And just to give you an idea, the United States across is about 2,500 miles. So these people would definitely be in the money and wanting to make this thing happen. And I can't imagine that they're not heavily lobbying to make the Supergrid happen. Okay, they know this much better than the guy who's standing on the stage. Okay, how much is it going to cost? Well, 60,000 miles. $800 billion to $1 trillion. Okay, now that sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but remember, that's not paid up all at once. No, that's just like utility infrastructure investments. It's amortized out over 20, 30 years. It's just not like, oh, where are we going to come up with $1 trillion? No, it goes right into the rate base and off it goes. It's amortized over 30 years, at about maybe 2 cents. To the average retail cost, okay? The average retail cost in the United States today is 16 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, add another 2 cents to it. And then you've stabilized the cost because you've gotten rid of that volatility of the natural gas. And it would be constructed and operated like commercial toll roads, not funded with taxes and the cost of electricity, because you are displacing the natural gas, which is volatile, and is using up all that water and polluting the air. We will have a decrease over time in our electric bills. So what we need to do is we need to step up the pace on this. The Princeton study estimates that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, will cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by roughly 1 billion tons per year in the year 2030. But it's depending upon more than doubling the historical pace of electricity transmission expansion of the last decade. So, these are very detailed studies and a lot of great, smart analytical thought has gone into it. And they really crunch the numbers. They have the opportunity to be able to work with computer optimizations and all. So this is what they have come up with, is that their study at Princeton finds that the high voltage transmission needs to expand at a rate of 2.3% per year, okay, in order to achieve the full potential for carbon reduction. That would be similar to the historical rate of expansion from that period 1978 to 2010, which was about 2%. So, the pace at which transmission is being built needs to be really stepped up. Now there are some examples where there are point-to-point high voltage direct current systems which are being planned and we expect to be happening. A good one is what they call the Sioux Green Line, and it would go from Mason City to Chicago. It would be 350 miles long, underground along the railroad tracks, 4.2 gigawatt cables, $14 million per mile. Well, $14 million per mile is about the cost of a big highway. Okay, that's how much big highways cost, about 14 million. Cost about $2.5 billion, and it would transmit 2,100 megawatts, powering about 2 million homes. Another one is a company called Grid United, and that's pretty interesting. They've got one that would go across the northern plains, that could go from eastern and western interconnections, and that would be 370 miles. Another one would be way down south near El Paso. And this is called Grid United. You could Google them and see that they are, a business that is moving on permitting. And so these are pictures of what the kind of tunneling would be. That they've got these boring machines that go under, and they're used all over the cities and stuff for laying cable, and about $14 million a mile. That's a picture of what a high voltage direct current line would look like. In the middle of that is copper. I brought with me something that I've been carrying along for a while. this is, a wire, a cable, or a conductor. Okay, so that's steel and aluminum. They could be using copper, but copper is very expensive. Okay, very expensive. So they use aluminum. Copper can conduct much better than aluminum, but for high voltage direct current, you're going to use copper. That made me think, well, now, is there a constraint on the supply of copper? Like what's the worldwide copper resource like? Well, I won't show you the slide, but I do have a slide in my appendix there that says we've got a lot of copper on this planet. It's not like one of these concerns like with lithium or cobalt. There's a fair amount of copper that's out there. But it needs to be sealed with insulation, because these are cooled by the air. And when it gets real hot, these things start to sag, okay? But when you're putting these things underground, you have to have insulation, and you have, so that's essentially what it would look like. Again, who wins, who loses? This is sort of repetitive of what I said earlier, which is the winner are we. We are the winner because of the cost. Now to my final slides. Basically, what we need is leadership. This is the missing, it's the political will and it's the leadership. If you sat down, the people who are making the big decisions at the Department of Energy, in the White House, at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, in Congress, these are the people that need to get their heads together. And this is what the National Transmission Study is attempting to do, is to like make this case so that we can actually do something. It was Abraham Lincoln that even in the middle of a civil war, he's basically saying this is what we need to do. And he wasn't taking no for an answer. They could have said, oh no, we can't do that. Too many Indians are going to attack us. I mean, any kind of imaginable argument that you can imagine, the answer is no, we're going to do the same thing with this guy, okay? He basically said, okay, we're going to put together the interstate highway system, and it was done in notice what it says, National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. When we start to look at the supergrid with the lens of national defense, that this is what we need for environmental, economic, and for national defense reasons, then this is the kind of leadership that we need. Now, we need to have leadership at the top of people that can explain it in roughly the same way that I'm explaining it, and sell it to the decision makers in Congress and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Now, I'm not alone, okay? I'm up here on the stage and you guys are out here. I can tell you there are hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people that know what I'm talking about much better than I do. And these organizations are just a slice of who's in favor of this. Not going to go through who they are, but there's a lot of industry, utilities, nonprofits. There's this thing called the Macrogrid Initiative. It's synonymous with the supergrid. And then at the time that they were putting together the Omnibus Bill that just passed last month or so, that's what, a $1.7 trillion. These groups were coming in and saying, you need to add a supergrid to that, but it's not in there. And it wasn't in the Inflation Reduction Act either. When I say it, the supergrid transmission writ large was not in the Inflation Reduction Act. It needed to be in there. But remember, it started out as Build Back Better, that Biden and the White House team wanted to add more than $1 trillion, and it got knocked way down to $370 billion. And transmission's really not a big piece of that. So here's a little bit about something that has not been in the headlines. Joe Manchin's always in the headlines, right? I mean, the guy was holding up the Build Back Better. He finally came around on that magical day. Some people remember that day, August 21st, when like they saw the news. Whoa, Joe Manchin's in on this thing. Wow, okay, now we can get going. Well, the backstory has subsequently come in as to what caused him to change his mind. And when he was lobbied heavily by all the giants quietly by the electric power industry, who had looked at the Inflation Reduction Act and they said, you know, if we had the kind of subsidies and clarity of purpose that's found in the Inflation Reduction Act, we are for this. So he changed his mind. But the thing that people know about Manchin is that he was the one that was insisting that he could not do Build Back Better unless it include permitting reform. And then when you hear permitting reform, you immediately know about his being a coal guy and a fossil fuel guy. He wanted to bring natural gas on a pipeline through West Virginia to Virginia. This is the story that everybody knows. The story that people don't really know is that part of his permitting reform included this stuff, okay? But it was all packaged, like take it or leave it, you know? So Schumer said, look, you cannot stick this permitting reform thing into the Inflation Reduction Act because there's going to be so much upheaval against that. We're doing away with public participation in environmental regulations. So he eventually said, okay. He voted for it. Now we have the Inflation Reduction Act. So who is against this? Well, you know, it's not too hard to figure out who's against the supergrid. Who's for it? I already told you who should be for it. Anybody who really cares about the climate crisis is for it. People who want to have stabilized electric rates and move into the 21st century with a supergrid, they're in favor, but who's against it and why? Not too hard to figure out. It's those people that are wanting to hold on to their market share. It's about market power, it's market share. They do not want to lose out on the revenue stream that they were counting on and their shareholders. So what we need to do is we need to understand at core, here's the issue. The federal government does not have eminent domain over electric power. It does have the eminent domain over natural gas. So if a natural gas company wants to put in a pipeline across the farmer's land and the farmer doesn't want to have that happen, too bad. It's going in. I've simplified it. It's not that simple. But what is simple is that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does not have the power to be able to tell that farmer, that rancher, or that suburb that transmission line is going in, okay? So not having that power means this country is going to have a real problem making this thing happen. So how do they get that power? They can't just assert that power at FERC. They need to get that power from the U.S. Congress. So there's this thing where I mentioned about all the solar and wind, which are sitting in these interconnection queues. They're ready to do business, and they're waiting on the utilities to say, looks like we've got some available transmission capacity. We've just shut down these coal-fired generating stations, like in the Four Corners, and it's going to free up some available transmission capacity. Are you in the queue? You can then get your project going. So we need leadership. Now I put up a couple faces on, I wish that we had Lincoln or Eisenhower, but this is what we've got, right? Okay. Now that's fine, because this Secretary of Energy is a different Secretary of Energy than we've had in the past, and the supergrid is now moved up in the hierarchy of knowledge. Okay. Before it was like, no, that's never going to happen. Don't talk to me about that. Let's talk about little things that we can do. Just little things, incremental little things. We need people who are thinking big. This guy's Jigger Shaw, and he's in charge of the DOE loan program office, which has billions of dollars, which is going to be able to help move transmission and all kinds of other things along. So there's $5 billion available in loan guarantees for transmission under his office. Leadership is needed, and I'm amazed. I was supposed to end by 8. Boom. It is 8. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And And there's Dave Bowden, and let's start with you, former CRES president.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Morey, for a great presentation.
Thanks, Dave.
One of your later slides detailed the eminent domain issue between natural gas pipelines, which are fine to march across anybody's field and backyard, versus electric lines. Do you know the history of how that developed? Basically, did the fossil fuel industry and natural gas industry find a way to pay off and corrupt the system so they could get their way versus electricity lines? And what mechanism do you think we can get the permitting for the high transmission?
Thanks, Dave. That's a good question. I know a little bit about the history. Back in the 1920s and 1930s, we had the Federal Power Act, Natural Gas Acts, and back then, electric power really was a very local and a very regional thing. You would put that power plant right next to that city, and so the transmission issues were really not long distance issues. Okay, and so they just didn't give them the federal government the authority to have eminent domain because it wasn't deemed as something that was really necessary, because just the way the configuration of the electric power system was back in the day. But then what happened is it just kept on growing and growing and growing, and then with the efforts to try to change that, because the conditions have changed, then everybody was saying, oh no, it seems to be working fine. So it was like kind of like, no, we don't really need to change that. That's government overreach, right? You hear that voice? You know, that's federal overreach. We don't need that. And that's where things stand today. I mean, and so it wasn't what I would call it sort of a conspiracy of the status quo that was trying to like keep the status quo forever. It was just like the way it was. We got another question. Robert?
Is it on? I was just going to add to that. I'd have to, is it on? Okay. Okay, all right, thank you. The other part of that eminent domain on natural gas, if I recall my history correctly, was Eisenhower, when it came out of after World War II. He said, hey, we need a highway system. We need, he totally revamped the weather system. He wasn't too happy about that on D-Day and so on. And also the energy system. And if I recall my history correctly, he was had a major role in getting that eminent domain on gas lines. Mm-hmm. So I guess we need that kind of leadership for electric lines to get some eminent domain capability there.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. That's good reminder of some of the influences, the history. Let's see.
And also, I mean, the reason why France is able to do both high-speed trains and nuclear is because they have a very strong eminent domain thing. It's not very well loved in the United States, as everybody knows, but it makes it possible to get to something. Hey.
Yeah, a footnote to this, the bipartisan infrastructure law included an expansion of DOE's backstop authority for allowing FERC to exercise limited eminent domain for, it used to be for national interest transmission corridors defined by congestion bottlenecks. That definition has been expanded to include corridors for bulk transportation of renewable energy and clean energy resources.
Okay, that was a voice of some authority. Dave Hurlbert from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, who I worked with for quite a few years when I worked at the Energy Office. So, Dave, what you've said is that there's been some expansion of the authority at the federal level of these corridors of national interest that can be denominated, and some expansion of backup authority if push comes to shove. That is there, but it as I'm sure you would agree, right? Is that it's not really that broad. It's kind of case by case. Yeah. Nice. Thank you. I'd like to also encourage some questions. I'd like to.
Here's actually one
Yep.
that came in from.
Oh, this is good. I'm going to read this one, and I'm going to ask my friend Sandy McDonald, who was the author of the NOAA study, to answer this one. Sandy, what is the vulnerability of a nationwide network of HVDC to terrorist attacks? This is Sandy McDonald again. He worked for many years at the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and I consider him to be my guru on the supergrid.
Okay, just a couple points. One of them is we become much more vulnerable to electricity problems if instead of just, parts of your energy are coming from electricity, when you have everything. So you drive your car with battery energy, you heat your house with a heat pump, you run your locomotives with batteries. There's battery locomotives now. When your whole society becomes electric, the security problem becomes much bigger. I regard the supergrid underground and with excess protections. If you saw that thing, that was a 5-foot trench that the Sioux Green Line used. But if you put it underground, you encase it, you have security along railroad tracks where if somebody gets their backhoe out there and starts digging it, you can probably stop them before they get too far. And you do other things. You have dual redundancy, 4 gigawatts on one side, 4 gigawatts on the other side of the track, and those kinds of things. So I think the design of the supergrid can add quite substantially to the security, but it has to be a planned thing. And again, long time ago, I was in the United States Air Force. We had some highly secure aspects of what we were doing. I think we know how to do it. You have to spend the money, but we know how to do it.
Thank you, Sandy. We've got another question that has come in. It says that the Department of Energy is also investing in increasing conductivity of electric power lines. Is that necessary or helpful technology for these HVDC lines and network? I'm wondering, Ron Horstman, do you have some ideas about reconductoring or using superconductivity or that sort of thing? Ron works at the Western Area Power Administration and has done his own studies on this very, very topic over the years.
I'm not an expert on the amount that you can increase the conductivity of various wires, but there are certainly technologies out there that do allow for higher transmission of more power over different lines depending on the makeup of the conductor and the size of the conductor and so forth. WAPA has done some studies with reconductoring in areas where the load has gone up and we need to transmit more power from one point to another, and that reconductoring has been very successful. We don't have to do new right-of-ways. We don't have to do new standards to support the wire. In some cases, you just reconductor the wire and you're completely finished. So the cost is much lower than putting a whole new line in. But that's about all I can share at the moment.
And actually, Hendrik, who's been helping me prepare our spread, actually just told me that he works for a company that, do you want to say 1 or 2 words on that?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So I work for a company called Line Vision, which is about based in Boston. It's about 100 people. And we're working on putting sensors on existing transmission lines that monitor the conductor temperature and basically are providing dynamic line ratings to utilities. So the idea there is to basically unlock additional capacity on existing lines, which I mean, I don't think it gets you nearly to where the supergrid could get you, but maybe it could work as a stopgap to, as electric cars and heat pumps get on the market to just get additional capacity with the lines that we already have.
Thank you. I'm going to add to that a little bit. I'm very happy that you're here this evening, and I'd like to learn more about that. What I'd like to add is that yesterday there was a committee hearing in the State House, the first hearing on Senate Bill 16, which is sponsored by Senator Chris Hansen, who's also running for mayor of Denver. And it passed out of committee, and it has a number of pieces in Senate Bill 16. One of them is to do reconductoring, rewiring on existing transmission lines, so you don't have to start at square one and go back permitting all the way to the Public Utilities Commission and start the whole game all over again. You use those existing towers and you can put on more high voltage lines on the existing towers. Martin, any other questions on there?
There are.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped right by you. Sorry.
Yes, I was wondering if any of the experts here could tell us whether the DC lines would be more or less susceptible to damage from coronal mass ejections.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to ask Sandy or your colleague. I've got something on that as well. So, Sandy, what do you have to say about that?
They should be generally safer. They're not 100% safer, but what you have with overhead AC lines is you have a giant transformer that, as you get a EMP type event or a CME. CME is a coronal mass ejection, and EMP would be like a nuclear warhead high above that generates a big current on an existing line. And there's three types of it: E1, E2, and E3. E1 is like gamma rays, E2 is like lightning, and E3 is like a sort of a very long current. And the trouble with E3 is that it generates so much current on an existing AC line that your transformer will get burned up at the end. And these transformers are huge, as most of you know, and it costs a lot of money. So when you put it underground, you're a lot more protected from E1, but the trouble with the E1 is it does fry some of the electronic equipment. So then you have to, both in your converter stations and other things, you got to put some of this stuff underground. Makes it a little more expensive. But it is underground and it's more protected. E2 really isn't that much of a problem because we already have protection from lightning. E3, sort of just add to what Morey said, the HVDC high gigawatt capacity is harder, and it relies on the fact that we have now for DC much better circuit breaking, much better ability to take multiple lines and control it than AC. So the belief is that we are actually much better protected from both bombs and a coronal mass ejection.
Thank you. Martin, you want to take this, his mic? And is there another question, or we got one here?
Are a number of questions.
Okay, great.
And
Okay.
I color-coded them.
All right, thank you so much.
And while you pick one, we'll have Steve Stevens.
Thanks.
One quick question. If you were running a bookie operation, what odds would you give that we had a meaningful supergrid by 2030?
How did you know I run a booking operation? What odds would I give? Well, I'd give it about actually built out. A meaningful, okay, because this can be done in segments. Yeah, and it's not like a flash cut thing. But I would say it's a function of political leadership. And so, you know, it depends. I mean, if we keep a Joe Biden and a successor that continues along the lines of understanding maybe the big picture on climate and so forth, I think that we could get a good amount of it done within, it's about a 10 or 15, 20 year build out. It's not, you know, it takes a long time. That's the best I could do. Okay, thank you. Okay, ask some questions. Okay. Let's see here. Here's one. Large solar projects such as solar PV enabled car shelter canopies over large commercial parking lots could be a solution to the load problems presented by the full electrification of transportation. How do you see this working with the DC supergrid? Well, okay, so this question goes to distributed energy resources. It's just one example of using solar at a local level, like on a solar carport. And I mean, that's great, and I'm totally in favor of that. And that happens, as I said at the outset, that all happens within the context of moving things along at the distributed level. But it's not like some kind of like, oh, we don't need this supergrid because we could do it all with solar carports, or we could do it all by having people put up solar on their homes. You know, so I don't want to diminish the question, but it is almost like it's not really related to like how that that kind of work is going to diminish the need for the supergrid. Okay, yeah. Do you want to describe that duck curve for a minute, since you've mentioned that?
Yeah. So the duck curve is going to be your net load, if I remember correctly. So you've got your load, which is your demand, as people turn on their Netflix and whatnot. You know, they're going to demand more power from the grid. And during the day, you're going to have more output from your solar. And the reason for the solar grid, or the supergrid rather, is that you're balancing solar across the country, so that as the people on the East Coast are turning on their Netflix and their ovens and coming home from work, people on the West Coast are off putting lots of solar. And so DC solar at a parking lot locally is just going to make the duck curve worse.
All right. Thank you for explaining that. I've got another question here, but we're going to go there first.
Yep. Hello. First time here. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Justin. I've been working for the largest residential solar company in the United States for some time now. I've had the opportunity to be part of some pretty cool projects that they've had go on. But recently I've started my own company called Grid Tech, and we're focusing on microgrids. Supercapacitor batteries, graphene batteries. If anybody'd like any information, learn about those, I'm more than happy to share that information. But we're focusing on microgrids, and this is the first time I've actually been heard about what's going on today, which is phenomenal. But what would you say the major advantages of a supergrid versus microgrids are?
Oh, yeah, that's excellent. Microgrids are really moving up along very, very quickly because of the advances. Well, first of all, the lower cost of solar has been fantastic. Then you've got the electronics that are getting so much better, and then the storage. So microgrids will live hand in hand with the supergrid. These are not in any way mutually exclusive activities. It should be pedal to the metal for microgrids and distributed energy resources of all sorts. We need both. We need microgrids. We need these solar carports. We need storage. The next question comes up, which is related to your thing, because microgrids include storage, is that how would the supergrid affect storage requirements? I'd like to also ask Sandy to come back up again, because there was some consideration, or maybe Ron, as you see the advances in storage that have happened, you see that cost curve that has come down, not just in PV, but just recently, quite a bit in storage. The supergrid analysis has been done with certain assumptions as to how much ability there is for storage to play a part. There is storage now that is now measured not just in hours, 4 or 5 or 6 hours, but in 10 days, right? So does somebody want to, who knows something about storage, say something about storage? Maybe you, Sandy?
Actually, let me let Ron answer this.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of research labs have shown that you don't need a lot of storage until you get to about 80% renewables. And when you really need it is 90 to 100%. And what I mean there is long-term storage. The lithium-ion batteries are perfect for day-night cycles, but they're not good for longer.
Right.
And so it should be full speed ahead towards 90%, and storage will come online when it's commercially feasible, which is when people will actually buy it, which comes kind of after 90%.
Thank you, Ron. Ron runs his own consulting and is a very active member of the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. So I appreciate hearing that, you know, it's important, but the gap that really comes in is when you get up to about 90% renewables, because then, you know, you might be avoiding natural gas because storage has come in. You know, I know that you studied this too, Sandy.
Yeah, just a comment. The amazing improvement in batteries really does help. And I agree with the comment that a lot of the storage you need is like 4 hours or overnight and that kind of thing. And the batteries help a lot with that. So in our optimization, we actually priced out storage and optimized with storage and offshore wind. At the time, our estimate of the cost of storage was so high it didn't use much. Both the existing cost of lithium-ion batteries and potentially the new generation of batteries that DOE keeps promising us really just makes the whole supergrid system better. And the long-term seasonal storage, there's a number of papers out on the idea that when you have an excess of renewable energy, you use electrolysis, you generate hydrogen, you've got your little plant right over a giant salt cavern, you store it down there for the kind of the seasonal storage. So storage really improves the whole thing, and it's the combination of variable sources, wind and solar, plus storage, plus supergrids that I think really make a completely new system possible.
Thank you, Sandy. We've got time for one or two more questions.
One of the questions comes from myself. I was a fly on the wall at COP23 in Bonn in 2017, and I got to hear a public presentation by the chairman of the China grid. They serve 1 billion households or people or whatnot. Yeah. It's quite amazing. And they made an early foray into that technology. Mm-hmm. Does anyone here know more how this whole thing panned out? Because as a dictatorship, they just went ahead with it and built that thing. But in the meantime, I've been hearing that some of their planning wasn't all that great. Apparently, they have wind and solar fields somewhere out west that are not even connected because they didn't plan it well.
Yeah, I'd like to actually ask Robert Youngberg, who's been to China and knows a lot of these compatriots over there. And I put up this slide, but I'd like to ask Robert what you know, if you can fill us in as to, you know, do they have stranded renewable energy out there that is not connected to that transmission? I'm going to show you a map, which looks to me as if it's like an intertie in China. Let me see if I could get that one up. It's not a network. But Robert, why don't you tell us what your experience is or what your thoughts are on that?
I honestly can't speak about detailed specifics. I do know there are cases like Martin was saying where they have built a lot of capacity, solar and wind, but it's really not that well, in some cases, not well integrated into the system. I'll just leave it at that. I can't get into any details on that. I wanted to make one other quick comment about the security aspect of the supergrid, and that we have to remember that is a network. And as most networks, if one element fails, the other parts of the element can fill in. And going back to the internet as a prime example, if one part of the internet fails, the rest of the system picks it up. And that actually goes back to DARPA from about 1980. There was two reasons to develop the TCP/IP, that the Defense Advanced Research Product Development, and one was that interconnectability of these disparate communication systems, but the other part of it was that it is a network. So if one part of it fails, and then another part can pick that up, and particularly these the storms on the East Coast, if we had that type of supergrid system, how it facilitates starting moving the electricity from those areas of the country that have it into those systems. Like that latest storm in North and South Carolina is a prime example where they could not get the electricity moved into those areas like they should have.
Thank you very much.